Greetings, visitors. Welcome to the Microworlds. My name is John Mead, and one of the things I love to do in my visual explorations is to film microscopic creatures doing things you've never imagined. So we're going to start off with the first of 7 species here. This is called Euplotes. It's a bacteriivore. It's feeding on bacteria that you can see there. It creates whirlpools with its cilia, which are little tiny hair-like structures. They create those whirlpools and sweep bacteria and other small creatures into its very primitive mouth. It is only single-celled, but it will swim around, it will crawl over debris. Most of the other stuff you see there are bacterial mats. And here you see several of them crawling around at the top of the screen, and they are bumping in at the bottom there to what looks like a little glass on top of a stalk, and that's called Vorticella. That's a cousin, if you will. It also feeds using those cilia by creating whirlpools. So a very common type of creature in our micro worlds. And now we're going to get ready to switch on over to something called Bleffarisma. And Bleffarisma is a very interesting creature here. It's a cousin of Paramecium, and as you see kind of in the middle there are 2 of them end to end. That is one in the process of dividing. Process we call binary fission. Basically, it splits in half like most bacteria do, although this does belong to the kingdom Protist, which most of the creatures you're going to see here do. And there you see one of the giants of the microscopic world. That is also Bleffarisma. And in this species, for reasons we don't know, they become giants and will eat the smaller members of the species and become cannibals. So that's something in my classroom that we actively look for. They're very hard to find. Here we see another filter feeder creating those whirlpools. This is called Stentor. Stentor named after the Greek warrior who was also a trumpeter. And you can see the trumpet shape. This is also single-celled, and at the top of the cell you see the cilia beating there to create those whirlpools where it will suck in anything it can get into its little pouches. We call those vacuoles for digestion. And then the amazing thing is it can detach from bacteria and swim freely around, which is always a neat thing to see. So sometimes they'll be barrel-shaped, sometimes they'll be trumpet-shaped, but this is a great view in what we call dark field illumination, so you can see the creature from a different perspective than you normally would. Next, we're going to wander over to a creature that is more familiar to most of the adults who are seeing this. It's called Paramecium. And Paramecium is also a ciliate. And what you're noticing now is that big sphere in the middle is a food vacuole, and it just broke off from the food gullet, and a new one is forming. And you'll notice down the middle there's a little tube with little black specks in it, and those are being swept down into the forming vacuole. There you have it again, and you can see the specks in there, and that will fill up and eventually itself break off. Those will then be digested at some later point. Another thing to look for is if you notice something in the cell that seems to squeeze. The problem for many of these cells in this drop of water is that they take on too much water and they will literally drown. So they have to pump water out from time to time. So one of the neat things we can capture under the microscope here is what we call their contractile vacuoles. They're water-filled pouches that basically have the ability to squeeze and push water out from time to time. And you can see that occasionally here on the left. Okay, there you see the food vacuole that just broke off. Okay, and there's a squeezing of the contractile vacuole. So this allows these microbes to maintain what we call homeostasis, a very settled internal environment. And there you can see up at the center here, there goes one. Bingo. So now we're going to move on to one of my all-time favorites. I call it snakes on a slide. This is called Spirostomum. And you can see from the measurement at the bottom that this is probably several millimeters long, but not very wide. And as you look, you can see the little chain of beads, I call it. That's actually the nuclei. We don't understand why, but in some of these large single cells, instead of having one nucleus, like you might have learned in biology, there's a whole string of them. The reason for that, not well understood. You'll also notice that this has almost like pinstripes that run along it. Those are called myonemes. They're like little muscle fibers that allow this single-celled creature to move. And it moves in very interesting ways. It has a lot of flexibility. You can see it can twist, it can turn. Up at the top there, that's its contractile vacuole. And here we have one of my favorites, Amoeba. And what you see here is the Amoeba is oozing, it's shifting its pseudopods, its false feet, to engulf a small creature there. That's called Chilomonas. And in a moment here, it's going to actually complete that engulfment. And you'll have a food vacuole that's now been formed, and Chilomonas goes, uh-oh, I've been captured, this is not good, because obviously it doesn't want to become lunch for this amoeba, but at this point it can't escape. The amoeba can now carry it around alive inside until the amoeba needs to digest it at some later point, and digestive chemicals will come along and fill up that space and digest the Chilomonas into a nutrient broth, if you will. Now, amoebas move very, very slowly, as you can see there. So what you're about to see here is a fun, sped up 30 times view of amoebas as they move, and you get the sense that they have no specific shape. These are two amoebas that we start with. One then branches off here, and it explores its environment, going toward areas where food seems to be more likely. It encounters another one, avoids it, and they just keep going along. It's a very cool creature. And here we get into the multicellular creatures. This one is called a rotifer. The early microscopists called it a wheel animalcule because at the top it has these wheels that create whirlpools. With my students, they know I often refer to this as a chainsaw head. And it basically sweeps stuff in to the middle there, and you can see what looks like a heart beating at the top of the screen there. Now it's moved down to the bottom, and that is called the mastex. This is the chewing jaws made of chitin, just like your fingernails. And that large oval structure there is an egg. These multicellular creatures will actually lay those eggs, which can then survive long periods of dormancy. And these are often found in decaying areas. Very, very important to keep our ponds and streams free of massive amounts of bacterial waste. Okay. So one of the most fun creatures you're ever likely to see. And one of the hardiest creatures is coming up as our last creature for this, and it's called a tardigrade. Here it is, also known as a water bear. And these guys are fascinating because you can see they look like little tiny microscopic bears with the head off to the right there, the tail to the left. And this particular species has 8 legs. And each of the legs ends in a little set of hooks. And it uses these to crawl around the micro world. And it will feed mostly on algae and bacteria, which you can actually see in the gut there. These can survive radiation, drying for up to hundreds of years at a time. So one of the hardiest of the small micro world creatures. So I hope you've appreciated this little quick tour of things. Feel free to look for more on my YouTube page, youtube.com/jsmead, or on my website, which you can see here. And you can contact me at Twitter @BlueLionPhotos or through email. Thanks.